Welcome to 409's Data Dump, a monthly podcast offering technology bites for the business owner. I'm Sarah Crum, managing partner of SKC & Co. CPAs and one of the shareholders of 409 Solutions. 409 Solutions provides technology solutions to small and medium-sized businesses, specifically in the areas of dashboard creation, process automation, and software integration. And our guest today is Trevor Liss, co-founder and chief data engineer of 409. Welcome, Trevor.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I can't wait to get started.
Yes, we have a really great topic today. Trevor focuses on helping businesses integrate software and automate their processes. And today we'll be chatting about software and systems and how to make the best decisions that you can as a business owner. So what do you say, Trevor? Should we jump right in?
Yeah, let's get started right away.
Okay, awesome. So as a data engineer, you work obviously with businesses and you help them make software decisions and determine what platforms are the best for them to be on. What is the biggest mistake that you see business owners make when they have to choose a new system?
Absolutely. So I think the thing that's most important when we're having this sort of conversation is remembering why we care about data at all to begin with. And really, we keep and maintain data as business owners for two reasons. First of all, for reporting, and second of all, for automation. If you really think about all of the different things that your data does for your company, it's almost always going to fall into one of those two buckets. So when we talk about choosing softwares or choosing platforms, which at the end of the day, the vast majority of platforms we use as business owners are just glorified databases. They're places we can throw our data into and interact with it in whatever ways that we feel like. When we think about choices for those types of platforms, we need to keep in mind those two key tenets of why we're keeping our data in the first place. So a lot of times I'll see business owners and they'll look to try to get the platforms that are going to be the most feature heavy or are going to have the most quality of life features for their salespeople or for their operations people or whatever industry that you happen to be in. And the thing that they don't consider is as we scale as a business and as our reporting and as our automation needs change, is this platform going to be able to help us with those processes, or is it going to become a hindrance and something that we're working around? And the feeling that I kind of want people to think back to when we're having this conversation is, have you ever felt like you're running your business in a dozen different directions at once, and every time that you need something it feels like you need to do six more things in order to get that report that you need or to put in that process that you had an idea for? If that concept resonates with you at all, this is the right place to be, because we're going to be talking about what choices you need to make to kind of smooth over those concerns when we're talking about platforms.
So it's interesting that you kind of mention, what is it that we're hoping to accomplish, right? Because let's use the example of, say, a CRM system, right? And business owners want that because they want to keep all of their contacts aggregated and they want to make sure that everybody has access to it and we're recording all of our touches and et cetera, et cetera. And that's the functionality of what they want it to do. But no one that I work with from a business owner standpoint tends to ask themselves the questions, what is the output? What are the reportings that come out of the platform that are going to give us the information that we need to make the best decisions that we need to make, right? It's more than it's just a piece of software that's giving you the functionality that you need to keep all your contacts in and such. It's really, we need to be looking at it from almost a much higher level of how is this going to give us the information that we need to make better decisions?
Absolutely. And if anybody's been listening to any of the other great data dumps that we have and been listening to what Ryan and Mike have been talking about with some of the great reporting ideas that they have, and maybe they've been like, oh, I can't wait to get that implemented in for my business. That's going to be absolutely transformative. A lot of times people run into issues where this system that's been great for them from an operations standpoint, oh, maybe it's missing a key field that we need if we want to be able to connect our payments to our operations. Or maybe it doesn't have the ability for us to pull out raw data and do complex transformations to get the really cool reporting that you've seen other companies do. And this can be a really common feeling, and it all comes down to some very simple choices or design considerations that can be put into place when we're talking about what softwares we're going to be living on as organizations.
Mhm. All right, so we're starting with a mindset shift, right? We've got to not just think about what's the functionality, but what are we going to be able to gain from it and how are we going to make better decisions from it?
Yeah, let's get
All
one
right,
level under the hood.
exactly. All right, so I'm a business owner now and I've got to make some software decisions. What should I be looking for in this search? Are there red flags? Are there things that I should be avoiding? Help me out here.
Yeah, so I'm going to say there's two main considerations that everybody's going to run into time and time again. The first of which is going to be scalability. And a lot of business owners are good at thinking about scalability from a management and from a planning point of view, but maybe not so much from a technical and data point of view. So we look at a platform and we say, okay, well, it's going to be able to increase its seat count for all the different licenses that we're going to want as we grow. And it has this ability to do these in-house CAN reports that work really well for us. But a few years down the line, you might say, oh, we want custom reporting. We've integrated in other platforms that we use, and we want to be able to see things from all of them. And maybe this platform doesn't give you the ability to do that. And that's kind of the first thing that we want to think about from a scaling standpoint. And then the second thing is going to be that connectivity and that ability to integrate. One thing that I say, and this is a standard, and I'm sure I'll say more than once during this podcast, is if it doesn't connect automatically to QuickBooks, it's a hard no in my mind. Every business, and it doesn't have to be QuickBooks, it can be whatever accounting system you use, but every business needs to be able to do their taxes. Every business needs to be able to run financial reports. And if you're taking the same data that you're already entering to do your business and having somebody type that in again into QuickBooks to get things at the end of the day, you're not going to make your accountant happy, and it's just extra work for you out of nowhere. And that just doesn't stand for just QuickBooks, though. If we want to take a CRM, for example, we don't want to have to be copying in emails that we get from clients. And let's be honest, with most modern platforms, that at least that part is taken care of. But that mindset of any time that we're bringing any information in, we shouldn't have to be ever be doing double entry is something that kind of can be avoided or ignored when we're making platform choices. And the other thing I'll say along that train of thought is talking about industry specific software. So if you work in any industry, whether it's professional services, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's sales, there is going to be a certain subsection of softwares that get pushed to you because you're a part of that industry. And those softwares can be great because they can have some quality of life features that may only make sense in whatever industry that you happen to be a part of. But a lot of these softwares have a reputation in the more technical community for being behind the times when it comes to integration ability and when it comes to automation features. So just because a software has for law firms or for accounting firms or for manufacturers on the label doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best fit and have all of the future looking features you might want from an integration standpoint.
Well, I think that's so important too, right? So we have the mindset shift that we want to know not just the functionality, but what output it can give us that'll be beneficial to make decisions. But now we want to look at, okay, what are my needs now? Because typically you start shopping for software when you've outgrown what you're currently using. Maybe they don't support what you're currently using anymore, whatever it might be. Maybe you weren't using anything and it's time to throw out the paper and pencil. So, we're usually at the, pinnacle of a change. We're at the precipice of a change in the business. And so we're looking for new software. But we need to be looking at software that's not just going to solve today's problem. We need to be looking at software that's going to be solving problems we don't know that we're going to have in the future, or at the very least, be able to service us long into the future, right? Because doing an integration and doing a conversion or even doing an initial onboarding and setup is incredibly time consuming and has to be done in a very specific way so that you get all of the benefits out of the software.
Absolutely. And I'm not suggesting that companies should go and throw out whatever platforms that they're currently on, but having a good understanding of what the pain points are in your platforms from a data standpoint can be a really helpful mindset shift for when you're considering where to put resources and how we're thinking about software choice for the future. And I have a really good example of this actually. There's a client that we have recently where we've been helping them migrate off of a legacy CRM system into something that's going to be cloud-based and going to be future-focused for all time. And when you're having these conversations, it's a great time to put your data hat on and think about, okay, how are things going to map in my new world? How am I going to be able to connect to things? How are things going to be more automated? And in this specific use case, they had a really great contact management system, but it was only for contacts. It was not designed for you to be able to manage multiple levels of an organization. It was not designed to integrate well with sales. It did not have a good pipeline notion to it. It just held contacts well. So when we're talking about going to a modern system where at the bare minimum, you're going to have a full sales pipeline. You're going to have it hooked up to your QuickBooks. You're going to be able to track what domain everybody is a part of. How are we going to connect those fields? We had to have the conversation. Okay, this field should be hooked up to the company level. This field should be hooked up at the contact level. Should our invoices hit the companies? Should they hit the individuals? Should we make it so they can never hit the individuals to streamline our processes down the road? These are the types of conversations that may end up feeling very technical when you're trying to pick a platform, but by working through the exercise can save you so much headache down the road by knowing that the platform can do what you need it to do.
But I found too, from the SKC side of things, working with you on 409, that's why it's important to have a partner or a consultant or whatever term you want to use. Because what I've done with you, as you know, and my partners have done it as well, is Trevor, this is what we want. This is how we want it to work. This is what we want it to look like. And that's very user focused and interface focused, and you can make all of that happen on the back end, right? For us as, business owners who don't have that heavy technology background, it's important to be able to work with somebody like you in a situation that involves a software conversion or an onboarding of software, the initial setup.
Absolutely. And if you're in a position where you're like, I need to change what I'm doing as an organization from a software standpoint, highly recommend bringing somebody in, hopefully us, so that we can help you out and make the right choices and get you set up for the future. But even if you're not in a position to be changing softwares, these lessons still hold value when we're saying we want to add in a new feature. If we can do it in a data conscious way, where things still connect the way they need to connect and we're not breaking things that we have already set up from a reporting standpoint, again, you're saving yourself headache, you're saving yourself having to redo work that you've already done.
So let's assume that, we're a business and we've already got software in place, and maybe it's not perfect, but maybe it does what we need it to do. And everybody's going to tell you it's very painful to make a change, let alone a big software change that involves everybody in your organization as users. But so as a business owner who's using software, how do I know that I'm getting the most out of the software that we're already paying for?
Absolutely. And this is kind of thematically what I was thinking about when we were talking about putting together this podcast. And that's the idea of having a single source of truth in your data. And we talk about this with clients all the time. And it's generally a fairly easy question for them to answer. When we come in to do advanced reporting for a client, we say, which database is the database, is the one that's correct? Because when you go to talk to business owners, they'll be like, oh, well, the information's here, but when you go to look at it here, it's all messed up because of the integration and it doesn't look right here. And that's super common. So we say, okay, which data source is your single source of truth? And generally, that's an easy question to answer. But if it isn't, that's where you know your software isn't serving you properly. You should never be entering the same data twice into two different platforms. There should never be oh, well, this one knows actually how much money we made, and this one has an incorrect guess of how much money we made, but this is the one we do to use all of our operations. That's a hard no-go because you're putting hours and hours of time and labor into something that the computer should really be doing for you. So that's your very first thing, is understanding that you have a source of truth in your data. Beyond that, there are some minor things that you should definitely be considering. Any good software choice is going to have an open API. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but that means that you can, for free or without needing to speak to the software directly, get access to your raw data and manipulate it programmatically. You want to have easy integrations. You shouldn't have to hire somebody for thousands and thousands of dollars so that your thing speaks to QuickBooks. Whatever your thing is in 2025, it should speak to QuickBooks on its own. It should sync with any of your other key business tools. If you use Salesforce or if you use Shopify as a storefront, whatever your operations platform is, should speak seamlessly with it. It shouldn't be a point of friction within your business. And then the final thing that I think is really good, that a lot of people might not actually think about, is custom field support. And this can take any sort of forms, but just because something fits the needs of your business now doesn't mean that you're going to have to shove a field in there a few years down the line to make it interact with whatever your other platforms are. So being able to have that customization ability and not having to hack a spreadsheet together 3 years from now is just such a save of time and just makes your processes so much more smooth. So those are really the things that I think matter most.
So I love that you keep bringing up this double entry or this double manual input that happens to be done, because one of the things that we do at SKC when we onboard new clients is go through a whole process evaluation of how are things done, who's in charge of it, what's the process for this, so that we know, but also so that it can be documented. And so many clients are entering things into, you keep using QuickBooks, but whatever their accounting package is. And it's so frustrating. And it's such a time waste. And it's not that hard to connect everything to your software system from an accounting perspective.
Yeah, and it cuts you off from being able to do some of the really fancy reporting things that we show off on our site that we talk about in these podcasts. One of my favorite things to do for clients is generate employee profitability reports. And they're super useful because you can understand, am I assigning my employees to the right tasks? What does my capacity look like? What types of work make the most money for us? But to make a connection like that, the revenue needs to be assigned to a project that's assigned to a person. And if you're typing in the amount of money that should be in each invoice that goes in the QuickBooks, that connection doesn't even remotely exist. You're completely barred off from doing that level of reporting. So not only does it save you hours and hours of somebody typing in the same number over and over again, you're completely blocked off from avenues of advanced reporting that are going to be universally beneficial for your business.
Not to mention the human error of data input that exists.
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, before we move on to our next topic, I have one really good example, just kind of this whole section that we've been
Yeah.
talking about. And this one lays in the construction and the manufacturing industry. We had a platform that we thought was going to be very good to work with. It advertised itself as being cloud first, of being innovated, and everything looked very manicured on the surface. But as soon as you started trying to actually pull out data to do any sort of advanced reporting, you have to schedule emails through a different tool that you pay an additional license for just to be able to get out spreadsheets of your data to be able to manipulate. You can't directly connect to the source itself. We were like, oh, if you want to connect this out into your timekeeping system, just throw in a field for the employee ID against any work that gets done. And they're like, we can't do that. There's no ability for us to add additional fields. So we had to do this whole complex workaround. And these are the types of things that if they had known they wanted to do this when they had picked the software, they could have made a choice that would have better facilitated the company's final needs.
So valuable. Absolutely. So business owners, again, not super tech heavy. Can you go through some basic database concepts for us so that we can understand a little bit about how data is structured?
Absolutely. I'm going to try my very best to keep this as high level as possible and only what we're actually going to care about. So, the very first thing that matters most is that all of your data is going to be stored in tables, most likely on any sort of platform that you're going to be on. You're going to have a table for your invoices. You're going to have a table for your time that gets kept. You're going to have a table for all of your projects. And just like you see in Excel spreadsheet, rows and columns of data. The most important notion there is the idea of a key column or a primary key you'll hear it heard of. And that is the thing that tells you that this record is unique. It'll be an identifier. And this matters a ton because the way that our systems are able to show us everything they show us is due to the relationships between the key columns on these tables. For example, my invoice might have an ID. And let's say I invoice out a client and we do 3 or 4 different projects for this client, whether we keep our projects as, organizational entities or they're just different people who are keeping time. There's 4 different categories that we're invoicing this client off of. The invoice might have an ID, and then all of the line items under that invoice will have their own ID for this is project one and how much we billed for that, project two and how much we billed for that. And those line items will have a reference to the invoice that they originally came from. That is super important to understand, at least at a high level as a business owner, because if we want to say, hey, let's pull that employee profitability report, for example, and we do have the connection between our accounting system and between our operations system, but for any given invoice line item, they're connected up to the invoice. And then over in our operation system, all we do is put everybody's time towards the invoice and not towards the individual projects. We don't have that connection to be able to say, hey, project A made $4,000 and we spent 40 hours on project A. because all we know is the 40 hours went towards the invoice one and project A is for invoice one. So we can't make the connection. So understanding that there's a link in your data from time that's being entered to what project it goes to exactly what gets billed at the end of the day, knowing that that exists allows you to create reports that are just completely impossible to create otherwise. So that's going to be our first key concept is the idea of key columns and how they relate inside of our database. We got two more here in case I'm already starting to go over your head. So just so that we can manage expectations here. Next one is going to be talking about structured versus unstructured data. So everything I just said above, that's all about structured data. All structured means is that it's in a table. You got rows, you got columns, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet. That means your data is structured. Just because your data is not living on a spreadsheet or in a database doesn't mean that you don't have data though. Even if, like you said, we're still way in pen and paper land, or we have files that are being saved in folders, that's still data, especially as your accountant might know if they ever have to go back and get everything together to do a tax return. The data's still there, even if it's not organized. And we call that unstructured data. So a lot of platforms can store both structured and unstructured data. And if we're going to be maintaining files, if we're going to be maintaining forms that we're having clients fill out, if we're going to be maintaining invoice templates that are getting automatically filled out, where those files are stored matters too, and how they're tracked. Are we going to be able to directly put any invoice into any invoice template? Or is your system going to be like, nope, this template only works for this specific project type that you set it up for. You get to set it up 30 times for all of the people in your business. These are real problems that people run into where they think things are going to take a few hours and the time for the reporting explodes exponentially because they don't understand what's happening beneath the surface. Final technical bit that we're going to talk about today. I promise we talk a little bit about APIs and what they mean versus manual data entry. Like I said earlier, all an API is, it stands for Application Programming Interface. All it is a way to connect to your source data that lives somewhere on the internet. So let's say that you use a storefront like Shopify or you use a CRM like Salesforce. When you get onto it, you log in online and you go online and you log into your account and you see all of your data that you want to see. But if you want to bring somebody in from outside to do advanced reporting, they need to be able to get to that data. You don't want them to be downloading exports of spreadsheets and that's how you connect everything. You want things to be automated. You want them to roll on without you having to put any more effort into it. So an API is what allows you to do that. It allows you to make a request, say, hey, can I get this data from this time programmatically? And it just shoves the data right at you. Having API support is something very easy that you can Google when you're looking for softwares. Hey, does this software have an open API? And if you don't find that documentation online or that page that they have boasting about it, just know that if you ever want to pull that data out or create custom automated processes, you don't have the access to be able to do that. So just knowing whether or not an API exists opens the door for a whole wide world of reporting and automation.
And that is crucial. And I obviously learned what APIs are through your team, and they are one of the most important things. And even when we look at software for clients, it's something that we bring into the discussion with them so that they understand maybe you're not ready for a full integration in a dashboard now, but at some point you may be, and you're going to want to make a selection of a software that has this capability.
And I will say that this is where that industry specific software kind of comes up to rear its head again.
Mhm.
For the most part, if you see any of these easy to use cloud solutions that are ubiquitous, they have great APIs and you can do whatever you want to with them. But if you use this service that is only for vets in the west half of the United States, you might be playing a bit of a gamble with whether or not you're going to be able to get your data out of that system. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking for a platform choice.
Well, and I think your comment too about moving to the cloud, right? If
Mm,
people are still using on-premise software systems now, and I include that to mean you're going out to, a VPN and accessing that software, that's still to me not cloud-based, right? Cloud-based is
absolutely, yeah.
internet-based.
Hmm.
So those are the ones that are more modern that I think people need to consider moving to, and they have a lot of the features that you talked about.
Absolutely. And it's not that it's bad to still be on premises. And if you do it right, there's a lot of advantages when it comes to security, and you can still have all of that same connectivity. But if you're a small business and you don't have a dedicated IT team or somebody who's responsible for that administration of the databases, being on premises means that anything you want to do with your data, just as a baseline, is going to be 5 times more expensive. It's just the way that it is. Not being able to, from wherever I am in the world, hook up a little cloud pipeline that's going to connect to your data and get you what you want means that I'm going to have to build some very difficult custom solution to connect into your network. And it just creates more hurdles than it's worth unless you really know what you're doing.
Well, and I think that's the downfall of business owners who are sort of handcuffed to using that type of software
Mm,
because they don't want to invest 5 times as much. So they'd
mm.
rather just forego a process automation or a dashboard instead of making the change to a more appropriate software and actually getting real valuable decision-making results out of that software.
And that's really what you need to flip the switch. If you're at a point as a company where you have a strong need for reporting or a strong desire for reporting that your platform is a hurdle to, that's the time when you need to start having a conversation as an organization is do we go full cloud based? And a lot of companies have already done it. They were forced to by the pandemic,
Mm.
but it has been a boon for them when it comes to automation and when it comes to how we talk about data in this current day and age.
So you keep talking about QuickBooks, and I think that that might be one of your favorite accounting platforms because it is so easy to connect to the online
Yep.
version of it. Um,
Accountants hate me when I say QuickBooks Online is the most amazing thing ever.
well, we understand it's coming from a non-accountant, so it's okay. But when people are using QuickBooks and or any other accounting ledger package software, it is really the most important software that any business can have because it's got all of your financial information in it. You referenced before it's how your accountant prepares your tax returns. But anytime you want to do any profitability or any analysis or anything that's really on the financial side, that's where it's going to come out of, right? So what should people consider when they make sure that their operations software plays nice with maybe they are using QuickBooks Online or whatever their other accounting tools are?
Yeah, if it's Sage, if it's anything else, the same principles still apply.
Right.
And I think the most important thing is that it's not that you just need to check the box that, hey, we connect to QuickBooks and we're good to go. Because companies like us, we get a lot of work out of fixing those broken integrations when they don't actually present the value the way it needs to be presented in the books at the end of the day. You need to make sure that you have a good connection to QuickBooks, that it's something that is aligned with the way your systems and processes work. One really good example, and for some people they'll be like, well, this is a duh, and for other people that they've never had the opportunity to set their systems up this way. Your products and services and whatever you're using, whatever you sell at the end of the day, whatever your platform is that manages your actual production, those products and services should be the same products and services in QuickBooks. They should map one to one. When you bring across time that was worked on a project, that project should have a same one-to-one representation in QuickBooks. It shouldn't be like all time and projects in this system gets turned into build time that only goes into the client system in QuickBooks. Because again, you're handcuffing yourself. You're working with one hand tied behind your back when you're trying to then pull these reports out of QuickBooks or do end of year reporting. QuickBooks is great or Sage is great because you can be like, hi, I'd like an AR report, please. And it spits one right at you. But if you get payments in from your operations software and you just shove that payment into the books and you're not applying it to the invoices that the software actually applied it to, well, now your accounting system is just plain wrong. And that's a really bad situation to be in because the people who are advising you to make the financial decisions, that's what they're looking at. So if they don't have the right information or a consistent connection, it's just a constant headache, much less mention, well, let's say we need to get prepared for an audit, or we need to go back and look at what you did in the last year, but things haven't been syncing consistently, or somebody's been doing it manually. Well, now you're going to redo all the work you just did just to get back to ground zero where you already were. So those inconsistencies, that lack of accountability or a trail to find the information from, those are what kind of separate out the poor integrations from the ones that work really well and serve the business owner.
Now you have an interesting real world example of, I don't want to call it a failure, but an integration that didn't go well.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this one. So this was between Shopify and QuickBooks, and I've talked about this, I think, on a different interview that we've done together, Sarah. But the issue that this client had was that Shopify does have a connection directly to QuickBooks it's like a third-party application that you can get from their storefront. And it does enough in which it brings every order from Shopify over to QuickBooks and it puts it into whatever revenue account or whatever cost account that you want it to go into. And that's all it does. And that can be good if you run a very standard business model. But as soon as you want to start introducing any complexity, and for this specific client, what they wanted to do is that they wanted to be able to better track deferred revenue. They weren't just selling to individuals anymore, they were selling to companies. Companies expect invoices not to put in their credit card at the end of a transaction. So if they want to invoice a company way ahead of time for a very large amount of some object on their storefront, they had no way of QuickBooks ever understanding that that was a transaction because they can either put it into their storefront and have no cost associated with the item, and then it just sits as revenue for forever and never gets accounted for, or they can never bring it across to begin with. And they had no way of knowing that when they originally made the decision, but had they known the integration with QuickBooks is important, we need to research what business actions we take and how those get mapped out in the actual technology. They could have avoided being in a place where they have an account that has $3 million sitting in it that we have no idea where the money came from because there are no costs associated with those $3 million, and the accountants have to go digging after it to find out what happened to begin with. And in that situation, it was actually great because we got to create a custom solution that sat on top of their existing integration, took any of the transactions that should have been a part of a different business process, didn't let them make their way over to QuickBooks, transformed them the way they should have been transformed to begin with, and shoved them right back in along with the rest of the data stream. So that was a really great solution. And if that's something that your company needs, that's something that we'd be more than happy to provide. But it's something that can be avoided by understanding how your software talks to QuickBooks.
Mm. What a solution you guys provide. That's, beyond my understanding. I mean, I know that I've seen it happen that you guys do
Mhm.
it. I don't know how you do it, but it's always an amazing aha to look at the other end and see what you fixed essentially.
It's fun. It's my favorite part of my job is that a well-made integration looks like magic to a business owner, and it's fun to
Yes.
see that reaction to them.
You guys are magicians. That's right. So as we wrap up our time together, Trevor, let's hope that we've got some business owners in the audience listening to this, and maybe they're, shaking their head or, putting their hand on their forehead and saying, "Oh man, this applies to me. My software is a mess. I don't even have cloud-based software. I don't even have software that still gets, frequent updates and patches." What's something that they can do right now to improve what's happening with their data in their business?
Hey, so let's start at the most basic level. If you're on a legacy system, if you're on something that can't talk to the outside world, first of all, it's time to start thinking about how can we move this into the cloud. We're at a point in time now where any time that you're spending hampered due to an on-premises system, whether it comes from doing double data entry like we've talked about, or from a lack of automations like we've talked about, is time that's being lost to competitors that are already on the cloud and are using these integrations to their fullest ability. So that might be some very easy to say advice when you're already using this, when you're already using your platform every day. So even if you are stuck in a situation where you might not have the most automations, or you have a platform that does a lot for you, but you wanted to do more, having an understanding of where the data flows. Think about your business processes, what they do, and then think about what the data associated with that is. If your business process is onboarding a client and completing a sale, think about how do I get the initial contact information? How does that get into my operation system? How does they get created as a customer in my books? Is that automated? If not, why? And think about what the time cost would be to having somebody like 409 come in and help you automate that system for you. If you're going to be changing platforms, or if this has inspired you to start thinking about changing platforms, think about those integrations. If it doesn't talk to QuickBooks, just walk away, or whatever your platform is. If it doesn't talk to whatever other systems you use on a daily basis, make sure you have a plan in place to make that automated. If we're going to go through, like you said, Sarah, the arduous effort of transitioning into a new system and all of the headache that that contains, make sure that it's going to be worth it at the end of the day and that it's going to save you future untold hours. And if you don't know where to get started, that's where you reach out to us. This is something that we do for a living, that we understand how data needs to flow in order to optimize your solutions, in order to power really, really creative custom reporting, in order to create automations that are going to save you untold hours. So if you have any questions, please free to reach out to us.
Love that, Trevor. I love that. And, to all the business owners out there, I guess the main question to ask is, what's your single source of true data that you have right now, and what condition is that, and maybe you guys can help make it better in either an integration or going to the cloud or just making things more automated.
Absolutely. Get that single source of truth in your data. If you have it, you've made your life easier for you and everybody you work with.
Yep, absolutely. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Of course.
And thank you to the audience for tuning into this episode of Data Dump. We hope you found inspiration in today's conversation about integrating software, and that you're walking away with hopefully some shining a light on possible frustrations that you have in your systems. And now you've got some solutions, or at least a few phone calls that you could make to get some resolution there. So if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe it, rate it, and share it with someone who you might think will get some insights as well. And join us next time as we continue to explore the power of technology in our ever-changing world. Thank you so much.